From across Bruegel's banquet table, Hershel managed to clock every line, every detail of that same sour look of panic the name Negan milked from his mother's face. Hershel is incredulous. He just couldn't believe that this was happening again. Even as Maggie openly chastised Bruegel's offer and shot it down, it didn't matter. Nothing she said, or could say, would ever matter anymore. Like everything else that came out of her mouth in an effort to reassure him. In Hershel's eyes, it was all garbage. Bullshit. Every word. All he could focus on was that reaction of hers playing back over and over again in his head. In an instant, the once hopeful path that lay ahead for them was engulfed by a tempest of resentment, casting its shadow on Hershel's already fractured mind. Her expression, it was that look of dread which animated Maggie each and every single time a threat to Negan's life came fluttering within earshot of them. The circumstances which linked them together varied over the years, but for the most part were always consistent and, to Hershel's utmost contempt, more frequent than he would have liked to notice. He wished he didn't. God, how he wished he didn't even care. Before he was whisked away to the city, life was simple for Hershel and his mother. Unexciting, tame, strained at times, yes, but livable. Yet, ever since she fetched and brought him back, Maggie's former demeanor as he remembered it, unassuming and passive, reverted back to something familiar, and yet changed somehow. The subtle and not so subtle nuances of this behavior did not go unnoticed by her son, however, and Negan mocked him every chance he got from just about anything that seemed to even remotely remind her of him. The kaleidoscope of green and worry in her eyes as they shifted, for example, the rise and fall of her chest, the creases in her brow, a shuddering gasp as she smothered whatever was trying to coast the light tremble of her lips. Never before had Hershel seen anything or anyone elicit such passion from his mother. Not a lightning bug, not his artwork, not even him. Maggie was not angry. Not at that moment, nor was she seething with vengeance, rolling her eyes, or swearing to the universe after hearing Negan's name for the umpteenth time. No, these were all telltale signs of someone who's concerned, who's fearful, fixated, obsessed, someone who cares, and all things considered, a bit too much for Hershel's comfort. He was no idiot. In an instant, the myriad of times he saw that look over the years hummed and moved in like a swarm, invading his already troubled thoughts to form the dreaded truth. The sudden revelation was a silent but violent one. It seized every broken promise, every white lie, every red herring his mother ever conjured about Negan, and cast them out, leaving behind a hideous yet very clear picture, one Hershel could all but bear to look at as he was forced to face the skeleton for the very first time. Of course, how could he have not seen it before? It was all so obvious to him now, and for a budding artist with a keen eye for detail, he cursed himself for being so blind. Hit with a sudden bout of numbness and nausea, the boy stewed in those thoughts at the banquet table as he rocked back and forth to himself. Suddenly, the adults' business conversation comes to an abrupt end when Bruegel's men drag an injured companion into the space. Before succumbing to her injuries, the woman had been severely ravaged, and dangling off what remained of her skull was the other half of a mangled face, ripped to ribbons of flesh and blood. As violent as that imagery was, the sudden disturbance is not enough to shake Hershel from his stupor, but for Maggie, the timing could not have been better. Always the opportunist, she would use this interruption as a conduit, for it provided the perfect excuse, the best disturbing visual aid to direct the next course of action for her party. Rather than venture out into the dead of the city before nightfall, Maggie will bookmark the chapter of leaving just yet. With no other place in the city to seek refuge, not to mention a vessel for her and the children to ferry back home safely, staying the night under a stranger's roof would just have to be the less risky of alternatives for the time being. It all makes sense, for the most part, but as we will soon discover, perhaps there's another explanation for Maggie's delay. Another reason for the fresh rattling of her nerves. Upon settling into their temporary living quarters, Maggie and the others are left to ponder over Bruegel's proposal. Leave the island, or join the battle, and not only gain a potential ally in the future if they choose to do so, but obtain the methane so many others have lost their lives over, ridding themselves of the Barazzi once and for all as a bonus. While Maggie and Pearlie discuss the deadly proposition, take note of Hershel's position in the gallery here. He's turned his back on the entire conversation, placing a significant breadth of distance between whatever's being discussed, his mother, and himself. Hershel's disassociating, disconnected, disappointed, and disenchanted by all of it. To compensate, Hershel fills the void by absorbing the names of artists long dead, and yet never forgotten, their legacies continuing to be admired and immortalized well into the end times. You may recall that the sculpture Hershel focuses on here is one of several the Dama introduced him to while he was in her care. And according to her, that artist was born in the midst of war, never knowing enough of what came before it to create anything uninspired by violence, death, and chaos. Not unlike Hershel himself, the direct offspring of two individuals brought together by a world plagued with violence, death, and chaos. Appropriately called the Talon, the sculpture's twisted form recaptures Hershel's imagination, and the correlation of all those thoughts sinks even deeper into him, clutching his traumatic psyche, latching onto his desires, and sticks there. He covets the idea of a new identity as it circles over him, the beating of its wings caressing his urges as the alluring shadow returns in waves, all under the dreaded watchful eye of the Dama as she revisits his thoughts. The tangled cluster of wires brought on by Hershel's past begin to unravel, yearning for and reconnecting to ideals and mediums the Dama exposed them to earlier. The bleak, empty canvas of the city, the endless possibilities, rebuilding the future, creating a new world through his vision. More tantalizing still, letting go of his past in order to reinvent himself away from the nest. Meanwhile, Pearlie gives Bruegel's offer to coexist some serious consideration, as a means to finish what he and his dead soldiers started, to continue fighting the good new Babylonian fight, and bring back the precious cargo they set out for in the first place. Maggie protests, of course, leaving Pearlie to question her as any and all other options have turned to ashes. She thinks for a moment, then makes a suggestion of her own. Rather than join Bruegel, she and the others in her party will move on ahead and launch a stealth operation to confiscate the methane for themselves. On hearing this, Pearlie is struck dumb until he reminds her that she and the children are free to leave, to go back home just like she said they would. But a stubborn Maggie hears none of it, continuing to run mental marathons as she dictates and spins an entirely new course of action for them. Now, let's just take a moment and try to get this straight, shall we? Setting aside her former position on things, Maggie's next move is to take her party of 4. Not 4,000, not 400, not 40, not even 14. I'm saying 1, 2, 3, 4 people. And together, infiltrate what's essentially an army base-like operation and obtain their most prized resource, before Bruegel and his entourage can. Then, if fate should somehow smile upon them and keep them alive long enough to escape into the night with the methane, unnoticed and unmolested by mobs of walkers, they should have enough energy and strength to haul the cargo all the way back to the mainland without so much as a boat. Did Maggie forget the volley of walker cannon fodder the Brazzi destroyed their other vessel with? How is this new death wish of hers any better than Pearlie's? In fact, it's worse, as she suggests that her party of 4, half of which are children, one being her own son, could stand a chance against an entire group. And not just one group either. They'd be forced to contend with 2 armies, as Bruegel, the genteel host that he is, has already made threats of violence and thus does not seem like the type who would take too kindly to being snubbed. And if that's still not enough to have room for pause, then how about a 3rd compound if you count the New Babylonians gearing up to strike? Without so much as a report of the devastation their envoy has suffered since washing up on the island. The more she spins the ludicrous logistics into existence, and the more desperate she sounds in trying to convince the others, it becomes painfully obvious to everyone present that Maggie failed to think any of this through. She gets defensive in her reasoning, frantically so, and the more passionate she becomes, the plainer it was to see that these spontaneous ideas of hers lacked a single shred of solid strategy, let alone the consideration of others, save one, as we will soon discover. All that aside, as disorganized and nonsensical as her plan is, it actually makes total sense when it comes to one very important thing: her character development. This rings especially true when the bigger underlying question posed to Maggie is this: what or who changed your mind to the point where all of a sudden you now want to get involved? She fought tooth and nail not to be dragged into this New Babylonian mess, and since then, her son has all but turned completely against her. Their party has been attacked relentlessly, their numbers suffering irreparable damage until dwindling down to a mere 4. She even danced the Tyburn jig, for crying out loud, and lived to tell the tale. More shockingly still, it couldn't have been more than a few hours since the plan to head back to the bricks with her son was the only thing on her agenda. So there is absolutely no way that she is now suggesting to stay and fight for a cause she and her son, at least, had no business being swept up in the first place. Unless it's not the methane Maggie desires, or even the Brazzi she's concerned about for that matter, but a certain someone still trapped in their midst. That's right, Negan, who neither I nor any of her allies can help but notice seems to be at the forefront of every chess piece she's played thus far. At this point, I think it's safe to say that these coincidences are anything but. Justified as she was in her anger towards him, this I hate Negan's smokescreen of an attitude Maggie's put up for so long has evaporated into nothing but that. Just a smokescreen, a veil, a performance of her own making designed to distract from the truth lurking inside her, one she's managed to hide for years. Even Pearlie says, "You wanted Negan dead once, and now you want to save his life?" I don't get it. Now, having come face to face with her own hypocrisy, Maggie looks to her son, almost in a way to suggest she's just noticed his absence. Only then does Maggie let up from the matter at hand and succumbs to reality, as she realizes Hershel was bearing witness to yet another episode of his mother's most tiresome yet irresistible of urges to cross paths with the supposed monster who brought so much pain down upon them. Finally, as he locked eyes with his mother from across the room, the thought of ever returning to the bricks, to any semblance of normalcy, is twisted and torn from Hershel's mind for good. This whatever it is, was never going to end for them. Not for Hershel, not with Negan, never for Maggie. The past is the past. It's what the Dhamma was trying to teach him all along, what she swore was the ultimate truth. The real path ahead was illuminated by neon lights, and as far as Hershel was concerned, his mother would never be a part of it.